Welcome to our panel this morning, Malcolm Farr, the political editor for news.com.au, and David Crowe, the chief political correspondent for the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, and the author of Venom, which is out now covering the events of 12
He just happens to have one.
Happens to have a
what
copy.
do you know?
But look, it is timely with the anniversary, not being telegraphed too much by Scott Morrison, of course, but it is a significant milestone, not just for him, but for the whole party room, right? Given where they were 12 months ago, David, it is remarkable where they are now. An election win is the biggest achievement. But, I mean, let's perhaps look not so much at Scott Morrison, but the rest of the party room. How have the dynamics changed?
They've changed hugely. In a way that's not always apparent on the surface because so many of the characters are still there. Obviously, we can see that Scott Morrison's in a position of great authority because of his election victory, because of the different leadership rules that he works with, and because Tony Abbott, Malcolm Turnbull, Julie Bishop, Christopher Pyne are out of the parliament. So he is in many ways more secure than any Prime Minister we've seen since John Howard. Now, I don't think that you can take that to the bank because of the way in which that party room works. But we are seeing a change in dynamics. He is not dependent on Peter Dutton and Matthias Cormann in the way that Malcolm Turnbull was. Malcolm Turnbull made a really fundamental decision that he would rely heavily on them. And he was warned at some times by Julie Bishop and others about depending so much on Peter Dutton. And he found out to his cost that he was wrong to do that. With Scott Morrison, he's got a lot more authority on his own. He doesn't have to rely on Matthias Cormann. I think some of the people, because of their roles a year ago, they are, I think, they could be diminished figures during the life of this term.
Well, it'll be interesting to see. We're only, a short period into this new term of Parliament, but Peter Dutton and Matthias Cormann are still the leaders of the right in the Liberal Party, but there are a bunch of young players on the right keen to make their mark as well. Amanda Stoker and Andrew Hastie and Michael Sukkar and so on. What about other power players? The moderates have lost Pyne and Bishop. Do you think Simon Birmingham, Paul Fletcher and others have really filled those shoes yet?
No, they haven't. There's no doubt about it. And they lack the sort of tactical cunning that, a Pyne and some of the others might have had. But look, looking at the front bench, there are three people who are going to be strongly tested. One, of course, is Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, and the storm clouds are gathering over the economy. Let's see how Mr Frydenberg handles that. Another exceptional case will be Christian Porter, who's both Attorney General and Minister for Industrial Relations.
He's juggling about 6 balls at once.
Incredible. If he can pull that off, he'll go to the top of the team. And Angus Taylor is a possible and probable, but he's had a very messy start. We'll see how he picks up. But if he can settle the energy question, which has been left over from both the Abbott and Turnbull regimes, he also will be earning big points.
And what about the sort of leadership we're seeing from Scott Morrison now? I mean, it has evolved, no doubt it will keep evolving, but right now at this 12-month mark, Paul Kelly was reflecting on his absolute focus on those quiet Australians and taking his time and not rushing big announcements. But, there's also some criticism, Nikki Sava wrote this the other day, that he's not doing enough to lead the big debates on China, perhaps on industrial relations or constitutional recognition, taking more of a back seat. What do you think?
Look, I think he realised when he became the third Liberal Prime Minister in 5 years that the punters out there were sick of being surprised like that. Hang on, I got another, what's going on here? So he calmed things down, and his two prime and probably only objectives were to design a budget to be taken to an election and to win that election. Now, he's done that, but otherwise he's done nothing, because that's a very good way to avoid dissent within the party and to deprive Labor of any reactionary powers against government policy. You can't do that when there ain't no government policy. Also, I'd likened him to a political monk in there, translating the words of translating the liberal gospel from the original text to the current vernacular. So Scott Morrison essentially has translated Menzies into ScoMo. So we had the forgotten people, now we've got the quiet Australians. So he's been issuing those reassurances that Menzies made some 70 plus years ago.
In a modern context.
In a modern context, you know, have a go, get a go, and all these plate loads of platitudes, but he's been very successful. People do feel more confident because there isn't the threat of some sort of innovative policy that might affect their job, and they do feel safer with Scott Morrison.
And Anthony Albanese actually has a really interesting phrase for what I think is a factor out there, which is conflict fatigue. I think there has been an element of that over the last couple of years, over a decade of leadership turmoil for a start, and Scott Morrison has recognised that and acted accordingly with a fairly steady-as-she-goes kind of approach to governing. Now, that means that he hasn't made major decisions that cause grief on his own side. Sometimes when he makes decisions, they don't always pan out well. We saw that with the Jerusalem decision last year. So let's reserve judgment. Oh, well, I'm reserving judgment at the moment in terms of skill at making those big calls. Well, he's got tests coming up, like religious freedom.
That's right.
On industrial relations, Christian Porter is moving very carefully, and I think that was the right way to go. On Indigenous recognition, Ken Wyatt obviously got out there with a message that startled the party room. There wasn't leadership from Scott Morrison. He left that to the minister to carry the issue.
And I
think it then rebounded on them and they had to manage it. So that was an interesting reminder that that party room is still volatile and you've got to be very careful. We'll see that again when religious freedom comes up, because it's very hard to keep everybody satisfied on that issue.
Look, he's at the G7 meeting now, and look, he won't be a leading voice. He's there as a guest, essentially, along with 4 or 5 other leaders that Emmanuel Macron's brought along to this G7 summit. There's some very big issues, and we touched on the trade war is one of them, and how that's going to blow out or impact on the global economy and here as well. But another issue, no doubt, they will be talking about is the Strait of Hormuz. Before going there, the Prime Minister made this announcement that Australia will join the US, the UK, and I think Bahrain has also joined up. But look, here he is detailing why we're doing this.
This destabilising behaviour is a threat to Australian interests in the region, particularly our enduring interest in the security of global sea lanes of communication. 15 to 16% of crude oil and 25 to 30% of refined oil destined for Australia transits through the Straits of Hormuz. So it is a potential threat to our economy.
We're sending a frigate from next year. We're sending a surveillance plane, only for a month though, sometime before the end of this year. Look, he's right. We do rely on a certain percentage of our oil coming through that strait. Plenty of other countries rely a lot more heavily than we do and are a lot bigger and bolder than we are. What he didn't really mention there is the alliance reason why we're doing this.
Yes, I thought it was very interesting. He put it in the context almost purely of Australia's specific interests in keeping the shipping flowing, our supply of fuel. But there's no doubt that it was... no way would I say it's a token effort. We got men and women on the front line there. That's much more than just a gesture. But no doubt in political terms, it was a bit of a tip of the hat to the United States saying, yes, we'll try and do our bit. It's hardly a coalition of the willing being built here.
No, and that's not to say that's a bad thing. I mean, if we want the US to be engaged in our region, David, and maintaining freedom of navigation when it comes to the crunch in our region, it kind of makes sense that we help when the US needs support for something like that.
And we are hugely dependent on this flow of fuel, when I think we still have a problem with the fact that we only have 28 days supply of oil in the country.
Not the 90 days that we're meant to.
That's right. So we are exposed in that sense. But it is a huge risk, and I have seen the commentary that says, look, we should be focused on the Pacific, we should be focused on our part of the world rather than take our stretched defence.
I understand that, but
defence
we
resources.
Normally do have a frigate there in that region.
And I think, and this is something that Scott Morrison said when he was at the G20 in Osaka. I mean, he acknowledged the fact that we've sent forces there to guard against piracy in that region. So we've been there before. So I think there is some continuity. But I do worry about just the huge risk of being in that region when we've seen the way Iran has been behaving. I mean, if they draw us into that, I mean, it's a significant
And everyone's being a bit cagey on what the rules of engagement will be.
Well, yeah, but if we are drawn into this, it's because of Donald Trump tearing up an agreement that had, whatever you might have thought of the content, had successfully placated tensions in that region. And we're still in the Middle East, that we still have troops in Iraq. My nephew's just back from a training unit there. It's not as if we've disappeared from the Middle East map entirely, but I think mentioning Iraq is interesting because many Australians will go, boing, hang on.
Yeah.
When we talked into an act of idiocy last time.
Start small and then before you know it, the risks are